Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. And thanks for coming today, and thanks for supporting Tech Week and all the things that we do. So the vision for putting together a Bermuda Global FinTech Advisory Board was to allow the thought leaders, the top thought leaders in the world who are avidly involved in tech and specifically FinTech, because we're using FinTech as one of the drivers, to inform the government's FinTech strategy, just to make sure that we remain current and that our strategy aligns with, as the industry evolves and changes and moves, just to make sure that whatever we're doing is consistent with what customers want, with what companies want, with what innovators, developers want. And all of this, especially for the Bermuda residents, is meant to help us to create jobs, because it's no secret that our economy can use a little tender loving care. And we want to make sure that we use our best efforts to broaden our strategy, provide another revenue stream for the country, create jobs, and really level the playing field and create a Bermuda that's better, that's fairer, that gives everybody an equal chance to learn, grow, develop, and build wealth. So the Premier went through his Rolodex and asked around some of the top thought leaders and people that he knows who are active in the space. And we've met a lot of people over the years, like Jeff Pulver, who's here, and put together a Global FinTech Advisory Board, and we've had a meeting already. We're having our second meeting tonight. Today's Tuesday. Yeah, we're having our second meeting tonight. And like I said, the aim is to make sure that the government's FinTech strategy aligns with best practice, current trends, and positions Bermuda to really be Innovation Island. We want Bermuda to be FinTech Startup Island, a home of innovation, a place where innovators, creators, developers can come and launch their business. We have a technology-friendly government. We have a country, a business environment that's ready and willing to help any investor, any startup, any creator developer to successfully launch their business in Bermuda. So in order to make sure we are at the top of our game, we thought we would have folks like those that are around me to my left and right to just help us to be abreast of what's happening in the industry so that we can make the world indeed a better, fairer place. We talk about FinTech being meant to provide financial services to the 1.7 billion people on the planet that still don't have access to banking or financial services. And we're hoping that we can tell the world the Bermuda story to really make that a reality.
Thank you, Wayne. But why don't we start with Grant? You're in from California, and we have a really great mind here, a legal mind, because you've been involved with many of the developments on the legal side of everything from ICOs to token issuances to the early days of Bitcoin. Can you just tell us a little bit about your perspective quickly on the industry, and then where do you see the global role for Bermuda as we go forward?
Sure. So just to give you a quick perspective, I work with the firm Goodwin. I started our practice in 2014, 2015. I'm a former federal prosecutor, so I used to be on the criminal side prosecuting, and then represent now a lot of technology companies. So that I bring sort of a perspective of a former regulator as well as someone who understands and tries to improve for technology companies. So where I see Bermuda fitting into this, I think, is sort of the good news is that we've seen a lot of regulation in the U.S., or certainly a lot of enforcement in the U.S., I should say, and some regulation. And there are a lot of companies that are very concerned about coming to the U.S. There's a number of regulators that recently issued a statement. It was CFTC, SEC, and Fenton. And I sort of laughed as I was reading, and it said, there's a provision that said, if you do this, here are the 3 regulators that regulate you. And then they go through, and what it is it's a patchwork of regulators and enforcement. So it's just very difficult for companies to operate in the U.S. I think the regulators are improving tremendously from where they used to be. But where I think a country like Bermuda can fit in is it can be more nimble. You're sort of building more organically, whereas the U.S. has sort of had this existing regulatory framework that they're sort of jamming in digital currency and digital assets. And so I think there's a unique opportunity here to be at the forefront of it, where you have people want a regulated environment. I think we all agree at some level regulation is good. We can disagree about the elements about it, but I think what Bermuda can do is be that regulated entity that's also very nimble and very business friendly. And so it's also known I mean, it's well regarded internationally, so I think you have that leg up as well. So I think it's a really unique opportunity, and I credit the government and what, Stan, you were doing too, to really take advantage of this window of opportunity, which moves very quickly in this space.
Thanks. Bruce, you come from a more technical background, and you've been very active in the development of some big initiatives in the blockchain space. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you see this advisory board evolving?
Sure. I think one of the things I'm most excited about is securities. I come from the securities business, and securities are still quite antiquated. In the United States, we follow laws that were passed, started 86 years ago, and still a lot of people have questions about exactly how they work. And you can take Monero or Bitcoin and you can move it across the globe very, very easily, but it's still very, very, very difficult to do that with securities. Even multi-billion-dollar sovereign funds and other large investors can't easily move things. And most Americans, for example, don't own any Chinese stocks. Most Chinese investors don't own any American stocks. It's still very siloed. And part of that is due to the regulatory environment, which I think Bermuda can lead in breaking down some of the regulatory barriers. Part of it has historically been technical, and these technical issues relating to requiring the need of a trusted third party to know who has what are being torn down by the blockchain technology. So we now have the technology that we could move. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to move a share of stock just as easily as we can move a Bitcoin around the world very, very easily in a minute. And you absolutely can't do that with stocks, but it's not due to a technical limitation, it's due to a regulatory limitation. So if Bermuda can lead the way in a more friendly regulatory environment that allows that kind of movement, I think that could be really transformative for the whole world. Stocks and securities are the foundation of the global economy. Every single business in the world is, pretty much is a stock, and a lot of that value should be traded. And there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to trade stocks globally, just like we can trade cryptocurrencies. And the mostly bad investments of the first ICO wave, there was a lot of junk and a lot of terrible investments. But what it was is a proof of concept that these instruments can be moved around. Instruments of value can be moved around. So all you need is more high quality instruments, and that goes hand in hand with the regulatory environment. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think definitely one of the big changes for those of you who were here last year to this year is this move and focus onto digital asset securities, say beyond the initial focus on cryptocurrencies has really become center point. Jeff, what's your view on this?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I have a different perspective. As a technology disruptor, I'm used to governments, particularly regulatory authorities, but usually governments, then the incumbents going to their lobbyists to go to the government to stop innovation. And what really took me about Bermuda is their proactiveness. The fact that they laid down an understanding of what the rules and regulations are if you want to be in this business. So instead of having to read the tea leaves of 1933, 1934, 1940, and accidentally try to figure out what you could or could not do, maybe, here in Bermuda it's understood. And so, I have a totally different take on the space. And the last question from the last panel, I would have spent an hour trying to explain my interpretation of the answer, but I don't have an hour to try it here. But I do think that we're sort of ahead of the game. We've never in the history of mankind had a technology that benefited from over $1 trillion of earned media. That is to say that no place on this planet over the past 2.5 years, and I think I'm grossly underestimating this, but there's been so much knowledge awareness, not knowledge transfer, but awareness about Bitcoin and blockchain. It is the most overhyped, misunderstood technology in our history. Yet there's not much understanding what it is. But there's awareness. And I haven't seen anybody yet take advantage of that. We've seen people swindle, we've seen people misbehave, but we haven't taken the higher side of what good we can do. Now,
couldn't you argue that Facebook is trying to do that right now?
That was a different question later on. I have a whole other. I think Facebook should be disbanded and totally disseminated. I believe that Facebook brings us love, but also helps amplify evil. And I think it brings more evil than good these days. And that's a different thing. But I happen to have also been someone who invested in over 400 startups. I started a few companies myself. And I would make the argument that if something quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, it's not necessarily a duck. That's how I was able to get laws passed in the US. And I think that the internet economy, the SEC was not born on the internet. But the technology innovations that we're seeing, such as the idea of digital currency, I mean, I was a fan of DigiCash and CyberCash back in '95. I was a fan of the idea that in this internet that we could change things, that we don't have to take the legacy of our past and bring it forward, that we can actually create. And that in that creative sense, if you're an entrepreneur and you actually legitimately have a reason to raise funds, like I've invested in 400 plus, almost 450 startups, a lot of times they go belly up. It doesn't mean it was a bad investment. It means that they couldn't raise more capital. These people did not go out of their way to steal from me. They just did not evolve as fast as I thought they would, or they couldn't raise additional capital. And to think that we can use the internet with crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and being able to get people to buy into our projects and to actually properly do things, I love that. I also think, though, that before anyone goes any further, we have to talk about the rebranding of this space. Because in some parts of the world, crypto is, we say it is radioactive. And that it has a half-life that is going to outlive everybody. And that if you want to take the good side of what it represents rather than the evil side or the misperceptions of it, we could. But we also need to make it simple. Because if my mom were to go on her trading account at Fidelity and buy 100 shares of IBM or sell 100 shares of IBM, she doesn't think about custody. She doesn't worry. Now, she may not download 50 shares to buy something with, but there's no concept of what she bought, what she sold, and get reporting. And for everyone in the world who's not from the Unix world, doesn't understand the concept of projects, who doesn't have to really understand wallets, if we could throw out all the old terminology and create terminology that was consumer friendly so people could relate to it, and we could start by changing the mindset, there'd be a lot more people playing. There'd be many more people involved in this because we wouldn't be creating this gap between those who know what's going on and those who are trying to catch up.
But it is an evolution, right? Like some of these things are just new and they need new ways to be described.
I think what happened overnight is I know some of my friends in Israel who are very fundamental in Bitcoin. They all came from a different world where they know how to program, they know how to code, and they created terminology that amongst themselves made sense. But nobody expected it to explode, and all of a sudden their language became the language that everyone else referenced. And we suffer from, as this goes to trillions of dollars of valuable for others to understand. I mean, I used to work at Cantor Fitzgerald Securities. I worked on Wall Street in the late 90s. Before that, I was a former expert in fixed income mathematics, and I built trading systems, and I did market data stuff before I got into voice over IP. And I can tell you that I do believe that Bitcoin will trade like FX spot. I think that in some ways, some of at least Bitcoin for sure, and others will trade like FX. And so when trading desks are set up like that, there will be banks who consumerize Bitcoin, and you will be able to go on and buy and sell, and custody won't be an issue. But if you want the larger market as a whole, and the whole idea that any innovator, anyone who starting a company should be able to raise funds on the internet, following ways to do it through crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, that's amazing stuff. And I think that we're on the edge of something even bigger than we know. But the first part of it is getting people on the same page to understand this is not about evil versus good, that we're here together to change the world in a positive way. And if we allow ourselves to understand what the rules are, what the rules of engagement are, we could bring everything forward. But you're stuck in the US right now because you don't know if you did something, what's going to happen 18 months later. Did I do it wrong? And so what I love about Bermuda is they and a few other countries had the balls to come forward and say, this is what we want to do, and listen for feedback from the community how to do it. And I think that's amazing. I've been so running away from innovation because typically as I disrupt, people attack. I'm so unused to being embraced. And it's such a wonderful feeling to be loved and to come to a place which innovation is being embraced in a positive way and creates a landscape that a place like Bermuda could actually be a home not only for financial innovation, but for tech startups to come here to be not misunderstood, but to be understood and to find a home to grow from, which is unheard of from where I'm from.
We've certainly had that experience over the last 10 years. Barbara, you're in from LA. You're a lawyer. What's your view on so you sort of the Silicon Valley view and then the LA view? To
The
sort of
Southern
wrap this up?
California view.
Yeah, is it any different than a few miles north?
Well, yes, certainly from my perspective, but having nothing to do with my colleague. I'm an internationalist. My firm, Greenberg Traurig, we operate in 12 countries, over 45 offices around the world. Our task, with 2,000 lawyers, our task force and practice group within the blockchain and cryptocurrency or digital asset space is comprised of over 80 lawyers around the world who spend a substantial amount of their time in this space. We work with regulators in the United States. We work with regulators outside the United States. So our mandate is really keeping on top of what's going on around the world so that we can advise our clients appropriately, whether they're trying to do something in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, wherever it happens to be. That gives us a very unique perspective from which we're able to work with clients and helps inform my role as well here on the advisory board. So I'm very excited to be part of this group and see where Bermuda will go over time. I think Bermuda, as Grant initially said, is in a very unique position, particularly because of its strong reputation, very strong historical reputation in the financial services space. And that gives it a real leg up on certain other countries who in recent years you've seen jump into the cryptocurrency and blockchain space and try to create a market within their countries and around the world as a leader in the space. But they don't come with the background that Bermuda has, and the reputation that Bermuda has is really being a leader in financial services over decades. And so I think for Bermuda now to be moving into this space is a very exciting opportunity for the country and really gives it an opportunity to make a mark on this industry as it moves forward and really set the bar for much of the rest of the world. Sir John, in his comments this morning, was speaking to the many of the geopolitical impacts that we're seeing currently in the world and how the disruption throughout the world is impacting so many aspects of our lives, literally every aspect of our lives, and yet many of the governments are still back in the 19th century, certainly when it comes to innovation, moving forward on disruptive technology and trying to come into the 21st century. This is where Bermuda, being nimble, I think the word was used earlier this morning, its ability to harness and capture the innovation and move that forward in an exciting way will really help make its mark on the whole industry.
Great. For those of you who have phones, you may have noticed that I've been typing. We're coordinating with our team back in London for quotes that are going onto Twitter in live feed. But if you guys want to tweet or quote, there were some really good one-liners in that round just now. So please hashtag Bermuda, hashtag Hub Culture and Liquidity Summit. We want to get the word out about not only Tech Week but also liquidity. So if you do see or hear something that you really get excited about or that catches your interest, feel free to share onward. For the group, back to you, Wayne, for a second. You talked about the ambition and why you guys have set up the advisory board. Can you give us a little bit of a roadmap about the next 6 months for the board?
Yes, and thanks. But before I do that, since we're talking with people like Barb and the legal eagles in the team, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, I see two people in the room, because when you speak about the nimble or flexible legislation that we have and the fact that we are riding on our reputation as a well-regulated environment, at the risk of embarrassing some people, I'm going to acknowledge and ask two colleagues that if they'll just stand and allow me to give them a round of applause. About a year and a half, maybe a little 20 months ago, we went to Davos, and we came back to Bermuda and decided that we would grab some people in a room and ask them to help us to hammer out a draft, a skeleton of some legislation that would really be the rules with which we all play in this space. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Lydia Dickens and Mrs. Maxine Binns to stand, if you would allow me to give them a round of applause, because these are the people, ladies, if you would please stand. They did all the work in producing this legislation. The initial coin offering and the Digital Asset Business Act, the first go-around. These are the people who were unsung heroes, sitting in rooms on computers until 2 and 3 in the morning, draft after draft, draft after draft, trying to get it right. So they are people who are important to me and to Bermuda. Often, sometimes these folks go unrecognized, and for me, they're important because they were the people that did the work to give us these, bold and progressive pieces of legislation that, are going to really help us to be the country that we want to be. For the next 6 months, members of the board will know we had our first meeting at the end of August 21st, I think it was, and then we're having our next meeting tonight. So the roadmap looks like Bermuda is implementing a digital reliance framework, and we are really going to, I'm not going to say too much because some really cool things are going to be announced over the next 2 days, but I'll just say that stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to make some very exciting announcements about some things that we're doing in the space that are really going to, we think, be game changers. But in the first instance, I'd like for the board to, we're going to meet tonight. I'd like to get, the attendance to be good and just get feedback from everybody so that we do indeed inform the strategy, and we get, a smorgasbord, if you wish, of opinions and feedback to help us drive the digital strategy moving forward. So I don't want to say too much about the next 6 months, but some exciting things are going to be announced over the next couple of days during Tech Week, and I think that that'll be the catalyst for what the board does moving forward.
Okay, great. I think it would be great, since we do have the board here, does anybody have a question from the audience about this subject? Pretty crickets out there. Okay, well, I have about 1 million questions. So, we sort of have like the startup view, the more technical view around how do we build these securities, the legal views, all this converging into a framework, which is essentially Bermuda. Can you guys give us your view of again, like where do you see this like in the far future? Like do you have a vision yourself in just 1 or 2 sentences for what Bermuda can achieve? And we just kind of quickly go down and see, like, what is your vision for 10 years out with what Bermuda can be? Start with Barbara.
Oh, thanks. 10 years out, that's a real interesting time frame, because we're looking, at least I'm looking in more of a 3 to 5 year time frame in terms of what's going to be truly possible in the near to medium term, and I think that time frame is really critical in getting over a lot of the humps that we're currently seeing around the world, U.S. in particular, in terms of its attitude towards digital assets and digital securities in particular. The comment was made earlier about the evolution of digital securities. The evolution of digital securities really came, in my view, in large part because of such strong pushback in the United States from the U.S. regulators on cryptocurrencies and token assets, the ICOs that were going on not only in the United States but around the world, and trying to pull back on that. I also believe that there's a strong effort from financial institutions who are playing catch-up with their own internal bureaucracy and trying to get a handle on this whole space to try to figure out how they're going to modify their whole business model going forward. I think on the prior panel, the comment was made about fees. And how do you adjust your financial model if you're operating in a peer-to-peer environment? So playing that catch-up. So I think the next 3 to 5 years is a real catch-up time, both for regulators, for industry, for mainstream traditional industry, not the innovators of the world. We know that the G7 has their task force as well that's looking at a digital reserve currency. That will be an interesting process as well. And I think for Bermuda, we have to keep in mind the impact in particular of what the G7 might do.
So would that be a single G7 reserve currency?
That's what they're thinking of.
Wow, that's a big thing.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, Jeff?
I mean, there's a whole dichotomy here, but I don't want people to get sucked into the vortex of everything crypto, because the big change agent in the fourth industrial revolution is the advent of blockchain, and the idea that in the third industrial revolution, which was a dot-com era, the TCP/IP protocol was built with trust, and the reason why we see so many hacks is literally people hack trust every day. And so the idea of being able to build ecosystems which have immutable trust is the big thing, much bigger than anything else. It is the foundation for change that will change possibly the entire world. And so, 10 years from now, it's quite possible that the US passes the Digital Securities Act of 2026, which for the first time in 100 years, or 80-something, 90 years, will actually provide foundational understanding proactively of how everything is going to happen. And it might bring the US back into being a center point for where commerce happens. That notwithstanding, we still have, you're going to have pockets of opportunity. But where Bermuda could very well be is it could actually be outside the box, because I do believe that if we can create a place where we embrace the potential of blockchain, because the reality is that the hype cycle for blockchain is almost over, that despite the fact there's so much noise and created about it, most people don't get it, and there hasn't really been a breakout product outside the fintech sector so far to prove that it's worthwhile. I could tell you that helping drive voice over IP, I launched the first phone network on the internet in '95. I helped create the industry. And we had 2 cycles that I was around for 11 years where VoIP was cool, not cool, cool, not cool. And when it's not cool, nobody wants to talk to you. And so if we don't have this breakout blockchain-based something, the killer app, if you will, that people can embrace, it's going to drop. Now, I'm not saying that anything in finance is going to drop, but interest will drop. And so from a regulatory perspective, being able to attract creative minds who could think outside the box, who can use the idea of proactive legislation to help provide capital for ideas to foster. I would love to think 10 years from now that there's an amazing startup economy built in all sectors in Bermuda, that we're no longer confined to 2 or 3 sectors that we can be great in, that it could be great in 38 sectors. Because if you could provide foundationally capital for people to dream, and for everyone to be a dreamer, to come here for their dreams to be fulfilled, where there's a legal way for people to raise capital, both on net, off net, that's amazing. And that changes everything. And so I think that's bigger than whether or not crypto is understood or not understood. And so 10 years from now, that's what I believe can be.
Yeah, I agree very much in terms of the emphasis on blockchain. Blockchain is here to stay. Blockchain is not going away. Blockchain is the future. I very much agree with that, rather than the focus on tokens and cryptocurrency. And that future is much more uncertain. We've certainly seen a lot of companies moving in on supply chain and manufacturing, trying to put those systems, transfer them over to the blockchain, and other back office infrastructure type of projects moving over onto the blockchain. So we see a great movement there, and I think you've made a really valid point.
Great. How about you guys on this side?
I was going to say, I'll speak from the government perspective, and I'll look at the future from a couple of different perspectives. Since I work for government, I'll look at the government. I'll look at, then I'm going to talk about banking a little bit, and then maybe individuals, private citizens. What's the future look like? So, the Premier's vision is for a paperless government, and it's obvious that if we could put government services on a blockchain or use technology to create a paperless government. And I see it as an opportunity to reduce the cost of healthcare. I think we can use technology to solve all the world's problems. And if we use technology to maybe reduce the cost of electricity, if we use technology to reduce the use of paper, and make government services more electronic, more faster. It's the user's experience becomes better. You cut costs. You make your government more efficient. That's a good model to use. So if we can achieve a paperless government of 5 to 10 years, and all have government services all linked electronically and easily accessible. I think of a little old lady like my mom. Came to town with me today. So when she goes to the doctor, she fills out forms to go to the doctor. What do you hear from Mrs. Smith? And then she goes to another place for government services, and she fills out more forms. And then she goes to TCD, what do you call it? The DMV in America. We call it Transport Control Department in Bermuda. You call it the DMV in the States, right? They got to fill out more forms. Well, wouldn't it be nice if, at least in government, since we're one joined-up government, you go everywhere, all your data's there. So data is king, as we know, right? So if it's all on a blockchain and easily accessible, you save customers time. And let's talk about healthcare for a minute. I mean, the cost of healthcare, they say, I think it's 40 to 50 cents of every dollar in the United States is used on the administrative cost of healthcare. If we can use technology to drive down the cost of healthcare worldwide, that solves a lot of problems. So we can use technology to solve all the world's problems, cut costs, and enhance user experience. The second thing I want to talk about is banking. So we're spending a lot of time, my team, working on banking and the absence of a banking solution in Bermuda. I've spent the last 10 months actively trying to convince banks to come to Bermuda, set up a bank in Bermuda. So we have crypto-friendly banks, fintech-friendly banks for our clients. To date, we have relationships with Deltec Bank, Signature Bank, Silvergate, who do business with our fintech clients. And whether you're doing business in crypto, there are mechanisms. That's not a problem. There's an onboarding process. That's fine. The future of banking, we're going to have a couple of banking panels over the next few days to drill down to this in a bit more detail. So I hope to see you at those panels tomorrow and Thursday. My colleague Dennis Pitcher is going to be moderating a banking panel tomorrow to talk about the future of banking. More from the technological aspect of it, the payments and alternative payment solutions. That's going to be good. And then there's an event called Tech Beach on Thursday and Friday, and I'm going to be moderating a banking panel with actual banks, people that are banking our crypto clients. I liken the future of banking to the post office. Some people in the room will know that in another life, I was the Postmaster General for Bermuda. So everybody's saying that, or 10 years ago, since the advent of the internet, people were saying, well, the post office is going to die, and good God, you won't need a post office anymore. You've got email, and you've got Telegram and Facebook that Jeff despises, and Twitter, and all manner of social media. Well, the post office is still here. It just changed. So I think that's going to be what happens with banks. Now, back in the day, I worked in the Bermuda at the Bank of Butterfield here, and HSBC when it was Bank of Bermuda. And banking's different today from when I worked in the banks as recently as 2005. But the future of banking, the panel that I'm moderating, that we're looking at the theme being people need banking, not banks. And the banks that embrace that will be the banks that survive and do well and make money. The banks that don't embrace blockchain technology and enhance their user experience and cut costs and reduce fees will probably some will still survive. The profit margins will dip significantly. But the banks, I think, will be just like the post office. The internet made the post office change, and blockchain technology and fintech is going to cause banks to change to be a bit different, but they're still going to exist. You're still going to need banks. But people will need banking, not banks as we know them in their institutionalized, traditional, conventional settings.
Well,
so I think banks will change.
If everyone can be a journalist, everyone can be a bank.
There you go. And then my last comment is private citizens. I think what you're going to find is that people are going to be forced to reinvent themselves. So you can go from being a Postmaster General to being a fintech guy. And I think that the people, you can. And people, and I watch a lot of American sports. I watch NFL. My fantasy team won last night. But I liken myself and people of the future to Bill Belichick and Andy Reid. The coaches that evolve, that reinvent themselves, that stay current, can relate to younger players, that can do the things that young people do and say the things that young people say, speak their language, play with social media. Those will be the coaches that survive in the NFL and the NBA for the next 20 years. Because millennials are different from me. I'm pretty much a yuppie or a bubby, you know. But the millennials are different. They're much way cooler than we were, smarter, faster, better, you know. And if we can embrace and create a world that they're comfortable with, speak their language, the nomenclature, and work with them, I think the world can be a better, faster, more efficient place, a happier place.
Thanks, Bruce.
So in 10 years, I think we should, right now we have in the United States thousands, a couple thousand publicly traded stocks and tens of thousands of traded instruments. In Bermuda, there's 800 traded instruments on the Bermuda exchange. 39% of those are funds. I think we could see a world where we have millions of securities, millions. Why wouldn't we? Why couldn't we? Why can't you own shares in your favorite restaurant, your local favorite restaurant? Why can't you own? The reason is because it's too difficult. Because to buy into your local restaurant, you're going to need to go to one of these fine attorneys and pay $50,000 or so, and it's just not easy to do in a small. You may not want to put $50,000 into your local restaurant. You may want to put $100. And if you go to a law firm and say, I want to put a $100 investment, it's just not even worth the time. The logistics don't work. And it's not just the legal system. It's the, up until now, it was the technical limitations. There isn't really an ability for a small business to do that. And the same technical limitations also limit, on a much bigger scale, the multinationals. It's the same reason this lack of ability up until now to be able to have a ledger that is distributed makes it so that you need to trust some centralized party to run the ledger. And that is a big, big bottleneck. That's why we have Euroclear and DTCC and all of these other bottlenecks, which make it very, very difficult to do the things that we should be able to do. I can pull out my phone right now and I can create an immutable token and I can call that equity and I can transfer it to anybody in this room in minutes. But what prevents me from doing that is mostly a legal and regulatory environment, which was written decades before computers existed, for the most part. So the technology exists now, and the will exists now. There's no reason that we shouldn't have millions of securities, and there's no reason that we shouldn't have a system where you used to not be able to communicate with people over borders. It used to be a really big deal to fly. You used to dress up in a suit to fly, and it was thousands of dollars. Even back many, many years ago, it was a big deal. And making the first phone calls, you needed to it was a big process to make a phone call. And technology made it so that these things are much more normal now. And the technology exists right now that we can do incredible things with securities, and it's just been held back by these legacy, tradition-bound, antiquated systems that go back decades and decades. And those are coming down because there's all kinds of jurisdictions all over the world that are competing with this, and there's entrepreneurs and clever people who are trying to figure out ways around it or ways to modernize it. So it's definitely going to happen, and it will be great because that's the foundation of economics. It's the reason that equities were created, to share risk. It's the foundation of what economics is all about, the ability to take a risk on something and say, yeah, I like that restaurant, or I like Microsoft or Apple or Facebook or whatever. You can bet against it, or you can bet for it, and you can put some skin in the game, so to speak, in making these economic bets. And that's a great thing that we've forgotten. So many people don't even own equities anymore. They own a fund that's managed by another fund that has a wrap account and an advisor. Advises a wrap account which just invests in a bunch of mutual funds, which then ultimately invest in a very, very small, limited number of equities relative to what is out there in the world. And that can be better, and there's no reason that it can't move just like these crazy crypto markets. So I think that if we have millions of securities and millions of stocks trading, that will be just better. It'll be better for investors, better for entrepreneurs. It'll create growth. The capital formation that we had that created many of the great booms in history. There's a lot of potential from it, and the technology is here. So if Bermuda can be a piece of that in breaking down some of these barriers, to make that happen, the technical ability is there and the will is there, then that could be really, really exciting for the country.
Great. And Grant?
What I would say is I do 2 time frames, 3 years and 10 years. I would say over the next 3 years, I think Bermuda can be sort of the sandbox for the world of blockchain and digital currency. I think it can be an innovative hub where smaller companies want to test out their products. One of the problems with the U.S., for example, is it's a $500,000 to $1 million investment to test out your product on a regulatory regime. Here, it can be much less expensive and much quicker. So I think hopefully that will allow a lot of companies to come here to be their base, to test out their products. And when their products work, someone mentioned before value, when they're driving value for their users or the consumers, then they can use this as a launching pad. And I think hopefully over 10 years, what you will see is that not only will you have this as a launching pad, but this will also be where companies want to end up completely.
Okay, great. Now, before we wrap this panel up, I'm going to do something a little fun, okay? Can I get everybody to stand up real quick? We're going to do a collective visioning exercise. So this isn't just about what the advisory board thinks about 10 years. We're just going to do a 30-second collective visioning exercise, because one of the things that Hub is doing beyond fintech and all these other things is actually working on collective consciousness. So we have a collective consciousness in this room. So I'm just going to ask you guys to give me 30 seconds. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Take a nice, deep, long breath in and hold it. Hold it up and let it out. And one more breath in. Hold it up. And let it out nice and easy. So we collectively synchronize our breath. And on this next breath in, hold it up. I want you to think about you and your role and Bermuda 10 years out. How do you see you and Bermuda fitting into this and creating this exercise? Breathe it out. Breathe it in and hold. Visualize.